This program is made possible in part by the National Endowment for the Arts and the Maryland Humanities Council. Ethelbert Miller talks with Amiri Baraka.
Welcome to The Writing Life. My name is Ethelbert Miller, and my guest today is Amiri Baraka. Amiri Baraka is one of the most prolific writers of the 20th century. Welcome to our show.
Thank you very much.
Let's begin with the 1950s, Amiri. During that period, you had come out of college in the Air Force, and according to your autobiography, you were influenced by a number of writers, the Black Mountain poets, the New York poets like Frank O'Hara, and also people like Allen Ginsberg.
Right.
How did these writers, as well as their work, influence you?
Well, see, I came into the village from the Air Force looking for intellectuals. Mostly I did not find them. But the point is, at the time in the 1950s, there was a really backward kind of pall on literature, the kind of, ambiguities. What's being brought back now, the kind of, what do they call that, deconstructionist approach to literature, where art, poetry particularly, was not thought to be the product of particular social context, but was completely autonomous and without any kind of social roots. The three groups that I mentioned in that, the Black Mountain people, the people like Charlie Olson and Creeley, and the, the beat people, Allen and so forth, the West Coast people, and then the whole New York school, Frank O'Hara principally. To me, this was like a united front of young writers against that kind of academic school. Now, when I first came back to New York, there was a guy named Alan Polite, was a poet, a writer who I went to high school with, who had come over to New York, who was my sort of beacon to come back to the village in the first place. But I was drawn to these people's writings because those writings seemed like they were an alternative to the kind of dry as dust academic literature that the New Yorker was turning out, the Donald Hall, Robert Pack anthology people, all the little professors who seemed to be too tired to make a noise.
Well, I'm glad that you said the New Yorker, because in your autobiography you talk about being in Puerto Rico, and you have a copy of the New Yorker, you're sitting on like a park bench, and you just say that, I was reading the New Yorker and I realized I would never write like this, nor did I want to.
Right.
Okay.
Well, it was a poem, I think, by the poetry editor of the New Yorker, whose name I can't think of. And he was writing about, on the 6:50 train from New York to Connecticut and, drinking the little martinis in the little lawn, and the wife who was like some kind of, little adulterous inferences and all that kind of stuff like that. And I was saying, if this is poetry, I not only am I not interested, I don't even have little bird baths. I said, when I look out of my window, I don't see a lawn. I see, it's a Chinese restaurant, a drugstore, and a bar on the corner, you know what I mean? And working people walking back and forth, maybe a prostitute leaning against the wall.
Now, in the early 60s, you did see something different that seemed to change your life, and that was that you had an opportunity to go to Cuba and see the Cuban Revolution.
Well, yeah, we had been following that in the late 50s. I started to get more political as the civil rights movement, intensified. And certainly the African liberation movement was intense. We're talking about late 50s. And so in 59, I came out with a little pamphlet called For You, a blue plate. And it was like 4 poems for Fidel Castro. And I went to Cuba. I think it was July 1960. I went to Cuba, I went to, to Sierra Maestra, the mountains with Fidel, and it changed my life because I saw young people my age, I think I was about 24, 25 years old. I saw young people my age who had not only been talking about democracy and talking about the struggle to liberate themselves, but had actually done it. And for a 25-year-old to see, 25-year-old Che Guevara and see 27-year-old, 28-year-old Fidel Castro, and to be there with intellectuals from all over the world, because it was there from all over the world, went up in the mountains that year, was inspirational.
And there was also one person on that trip, Robert Williams.
Well, Rob, yeah, he was a hero in Cuba because, you know, the famous kissing case in North Carolina where they had locked up this 8-year-old black kid for kissing this white girl. And Rob was the head of the NAACP at the time, and it was a new kind of NAACP because he was a veteran, and they were actually armed. So when the Klan came to town, they ambushed the Klan and took their hoods off, the hoodlums, and, you know, actually took their guns away from. And that was inspirational to us, to we young people at the time. And meeting this man in Cuba was wonderful. As a matter of fact, I was with him when he stormed into the American ambassador's office and demanded with his .45 that this man contact, because his family was being attacked by the North Carolina State National Guard at that particular time when we were in Cuba. But Rob Williams was one of the people I met in Cuba, right, along with the Cuban revolutionaries, and it changed my life.
Well, let's hear one of the poems that's right around that time, you know, in the late 50s. You have a poem in terms of preface to a 20-volume suicide note.
Well, this poem, actually, 57, is a long time before I went to Cuba. This is 1957. I didn't go to Cuba till 1960. This is the first, you're talking about preface to a 20-volume suicide. This is the first poem that ever got published, that I ever published. And I wrote this poem, and I got a card, a postcard in green ink, and it said, "Hail, LeRoi from Harlem. I understand that you're colored." It was from Langston Hughes. I thought somebody was putting me on, but anyway, preface to a 20-volume suicide note for Kelly, born 16 May 1959. This poem was written in 1957, so there was no child. Lately, I've become accustomed to the way the ground opened up and envelops me each time I go out to walk the dog, or the broad-edged silly music the wind makes when I run for a bus. Things have come to that. And now each night I count the stars, and each night I get the same number, and when they will not come to be counted, I count the holes they leave. Nobody sings anymore. And then last night I tiptoed up to my daughter's room and heard her talking to someone, and when I opened the door, there was no one there, only she on her knees, peeking into her own clasped hands. It's March 1957. Right. It's wild. The child wasn't born until 2 years later.
You know, you mentioned Kelly. We look at your children. Your children have really done a lot in terms of contributions to African-American culture. I think of Kelly and Lisa and Ross. How has it been in terms of you as a father and also having a literary career? How has it been a balance? Has it been difficult? Also writing for
I think it's always difficult, because I think that not only the fact of being the literary thing, but then Raz and the other kids, Oblaji and Amiri, and Ahi and Sean, they were born when I was an activist. So not only you have the literary, you know, the literary kind of demands that are made on you, but the activism is much more severe. You know, I mean, you're on demonstrations, you're in Chicago, you're in Gary at the National Black Assembly, you're on, you know, down in Washington, the African Liberation Support Committee. It's interesting because Amina, there's a lot of pictures of Amina with the kids, but one fantastic picture we were talking about the other night. She has Raz in her arms, and Raz is a great poet. She has Raz in her arms, and because she has him like this, she's holding him like, you know, nothing could get that child out of her arms, short of a bazooka. Raz, who feels perfectly secure then, is leaning forward like this, and his eyes are big as the world, and he's just, because he's so secure, he's just looking, penetrating out in the world. And I think that's the kind of thing you always want to give your children, and that you, I know Amina and I lament sometimes that we could not give more of that kind of real, ultimate kind of security to our children because of the demands of the movement. But
well, let's talk about the movement, because it's so much of a part of your life. People feel that, some critics will say the movement changed your poetry in such a way that the quality, you know, was affected. But we also know that looking at your life, one person that's key, you know, I mentioned Robert Williams earlier, but would be Malcolm X.
Sure.
In terms of changing your consciousness, pulling you up into Harlem, making you the activist as part of the Black liberation movement.
Well, see, the point is this. Like Mao Zedong says, where do ideas come from? Do they drop from the sky? No, they don't drop from the sky. Ideas come from your social life. And as your social life changes, your day-to-day material existence changes, so the focus of what you want to speak about, what becomes important to you, changes. So that if you leave some kind of, you know, closed, effete circle of literateurs who have no real, interest in the human rights movement to transform society, then they're going to think because your topics, your themes, your focus changes, that somehow your poetry is diminished. But quite the contrary. I think most black people wouldn't know me if it wasn't for my own participation. And certainly my wife always says this. They wouldn't know you if you wasn't involved in the struggle to transform reality, the struggle to, for democracy, the struggle now for socialism. They wouldn't know you. And it's true, because people are concerned with what changes their lives, with what moves them. Now, I might be known by a circle of literary lights, et cetera, but in terms of the broad masses of the people, I think they know me because that I've been not only a writer, but principally because I have been a voice in the movement among many voices.
You've also been a writer influenced by a number of geographical areas. I think of Greenwich Village, Harlem, and Newark. Yeah, many times when we look at writers, they write about these places.
Have to.
And right, they have to.
Right.
Looking at Newark, I mean, it places you in New Jersey, it places you in a whole tradition of great, Jersey writers. Right, do you see yourself operating that tradition? Williams, Ginsberg?
Well, I'll tell you, it's interesting. When people talk about poets, remember that Allen Ginsberg and I were born in Newark. I mean, that's wild to me. I mean, I always think that's wild. Two black poet, white poet, people want to make all this different kind of controversy. We both came from Newark. What does that mean? It means that Newark, being a country town, but 12 miles away from New York, mixes that country, that country and that city quality. Same thing with Williams, William Carlos Williams. Remember, that's a Puerto Rican name, see? And Williams, although people just assume that that's like an Anglo type of thing, that's a mixture. That's a mixture of the Puerto Rican, the Puerto Rican is mama, the Puerto Rican quality, and at the same time, the American quality. And those cities outside of New York, yet close to New York, they combine that urban kind of diversity, but that non-urban kind of laid-back quality. Now you want to find some country people, you come to Newark. But the only thing is they about 12 miles from the city. So there's always that mixture. And I think New Jersey is probably a key state in that kind of relationship, that countrified aspect relating to that city. That's why we got so many great musicians out of it.
Well, let's talk about the music. Because when we think about your work, we think about jazz, we think about the blues, but you're an R&B man. Okay, you're an R&B man.
Well, I came out of that.
You came out of that. We can't deny that. Talk about how you try to incorporate that into your work, and then also link it to poets like Langston Hughes and Sterling Brown.
Well, you see, before I came to New York, before I came anywhere, the music had shaped my life. I mean, blues particularly, because I grew up in that. And black communities, where we used to play the music over the loudspeaker trying to sell the records. You'd walk down the street, you'd always hear something, Now, I grew up, even though in my house, blues and gospel was always playing. And my parents were always, Ella Fitzgerald, that was standard. Ella Fitzgerald and Count Basie, that's, was old line stuff in our house. You know what I mean? I remember Tisket a Tasket, I lost my yellow basket, all those things, before we even got outside. And then the blues. My folks loved the blues. My grandmother and grandfather, they loved the blues. My grandfather loved the country blues. And then I was a regular, you're right, I was R&B man, all the different kind of the bird name groups, the flower name groups, the Orioles, the Clovers, and I remember my first idea about poetry was somebody like Larry Darnell, right in the middle of his song, he sings, you're right up on the top now, you want to be free. Why are you afraid to be seen with somebody like me? Why you fool, you poor, sad, worthless, foolish fool. I used to walk down the halls of my high school saying that. You poor, sad, worthless, foolish fool. Do you think your money could buy? You know what I mean? Because that to me was drama.
Right. But then you pull all of this in what I consider a real masterpiece in the tradition for Blythe. Could you read an excerpt from that? Okay. Because I think of that poem as almost documenting African-American music.
Well, it was really meant to document everything that had ever influenced me, in tradition, and I left some stuff out, but still in terms of the diversity of it. Arthur Blythe says it in the tradition. Tradition of Douglas, of David Walker, Garnett, Turner, Tubman, of rages, of kings and counts and dukes, of satchel mouths and sun-ras, of Bessies and Billies and Sassies and Mas, musical screaming niggas, yeah. Tradition of Brown Wells and Brown Sterling and Brown Clifford, of H-Rap and H-Box, Black Baltimore Sister Blues anti-slavery singers, countless funky blind folks and one-leg country beboppers, bottlenecking and guitar deck dudes, whispering, thrashing, cakewalking, raging, ladies and gent, get down folks, elegant as skywriting. Tradition of Du Bois, Baby Dodds and Lovey Austin, Sojourner. I thought I heard Buddy Bolden say, you terrible, you awful, Lester, why do you want to be the president of all this? Of the blues and slow sideways horn. Tradition of blue presidents locked up in the brig for wearing zoot suit army pants. Tradition of monks and outside dudes, of Mary Lou's and notes hung vibrating blue, just beyond, just after, just before, just faster, just slowly, twilight crazier than Europe or its racist children. Be-do-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee. Arthur. Tradition of shooters and silver fast dribblers, a real fancy mammy jam, as fancy as birds flight. Sunward, high, 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 sunward, arc, swoop, spirals in the tradition. Quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes, 32nd, 64th, 128th, silver blue presidents of Langston and Langston manifestos. Tell us again about the Negro artists in the racial mountains so we will not be Negro artists. McKay banjos and Holmes in Harlem, Blue Black Boys and Little Richard Wright's tradition of For My People Margaret Walker and David Walker and Junior Walker and Walker Smith, Sweet Ray Leonard rocking in rhythm with musical dukes. What is this tradition based on? We blue-black wards struggling against a big white fog. Africa people, our fingerprints are everywhere on you, America. Our fingerprints are everywhere. Césaire told you that. Our family strewn around the world has made more parts of that world blue and funky, cooler, flashier, hotter, Afro-Cuban James Brownie, a wide Pan-African world. Though we are Afro-Americans, African-Americans, let the geographic history of our flaming hatchet motion, hot axe motion, hammer and hatchet, our cotton history, our rum and indigo, sugarcane history,
in the tradition,
etc., etc.
You know, when we look at your work, Amiri, a couple other things pop out. One is the humor. Also, is what I consider your interest in popular culture in terms of like the Green Lantern. You know, pops up. You know, in fact, I thought that was your secret identity for a long time.
Green
you know?
Lantern,
right? Talk about how you incorporate that into your work, because it seems to be a gift that you have.
Well, what it is that I think once you realize that everything in your life is significant, and that there is no, say, symbolism or metaphor more important than any other, it's the kind of aspect of life that you invest in it, you know. So that Green Lantern for me, you know, in day or night, no evil will escape my sight. That's what the Green Lantern used to say when he put his magic ring to the lantern, you know. No evil will escape my sight. I took that in as a little boy. All those heroes that I used to see, you know, whether it was Robin Hood or, you know, I took that in. I believed that. You know, I believed what was taught in Sunday school, that evil was going to lose and that we should dedicate our lives to killing evil. It's only when you get older, then you begin to see that ain't easy. Right. See, and it ain't like on television or the radio where it's going to happen like that it means sacrifice.
Well, let's talk about that.
People are going to put you down.
Let's talk about that sacrifice. Yeah. One thing that we see happening across the country to many African-American writers, especially Maya Angelou, Richard Wright, is this issue of censorship, of books being, you know, pulled off shelves or being targeted by right-wing organizations. Has that affected your work?
Well, I mean, yeah, sure. I mean, I've had books, you know, look, I've gone to court about stuff like that, but the most important form of censorship is not to publish your work, is what to do. And I think the point is, if you look at most of my books, like Translucency, Marsilio, that's an Italian publisher. What is this? Autobiography of LeRoi Jones. That's Freundlich Books. You never heard of that. Most of these publishers that I have are small publishers, fugitive publishers, black publishers, Italian publishers in Italy. You know, I'm getting ready to get published by St. Martin down in the islands, and another Italian publisher from California. Why? Because not only are the majors being bought by, you know, international finance capital and moved out, just like the bookstores, so soon they'll be able to select exactly what you read. But it's the most subtle form of censorship not to publish it. And I think it means that those of us who consider ourselves artists and intellectuals and activists have to create an alternative superstructure an alternative network of institutions to carry the philosophy which is an alternative to the kind of imperialist philosophy which is day by day snatching all publishers out of the United States. Even Knopf and Simon & Schuster no longer exist as domestic publishers. These are now part of networks.
Well, let's look at some of the other problems, okay? Say we have the books. So let's look at how you, Baraka, are taught in some of our colleges. If I look at some of the anthology, it seems as if it's some of the same poems that are always in the anthologies.
Right.
Pretty much it's your early work,
sure,
not your work from, like, say, Hard Facts or some of your later books. Is that a problem that you face in terms of representation?
Because those people then, as I say, they can define what you are to read. They can say what is fit for the youth to know. See, and it's only with great effort that young people can break out of that mold, and I think that the writers have to help. The writers have to begin, rather than willingly shuffling off into the little greasy imperialist traps that, you know, they have to begin to create more of an alternative network. They have to be able to publish themselves and to create. Look, there was enough writers at Dodge this weekend to put together an entirely alternative network of publishers and distributors. I always say 27 cities because black people are majorities or large pluralities in 27 cities in the United States. But not only that, most working people live around those cities. You understand what I'm saying? Whatever nationality. And so it's possible in those 27 cities, relatively easy, let's say easier than you think, to set up a network. You publish your book in D.C., somebody else publishes a book in Baltimore, somebody publishes a book in Wilmington, somebody in Philly, somebody in New York. Then, okay, I'm going to send you 100 books to distribute, you send me 100 books. That's a relatively easy network to start. But the point is, most of us who are raised up in the tradition of the patronage of the rich, that's why they call them royalties, like you're in the court of the king and the queen, and so they toss you a few pennies. Who else would accept 10% of their own work as a royalty? You know, even somebody growing tomatoes want more than 10%.
Well, talking about the 10%,
right.
You mentioned about our young people. I think if we would look at some of the writers who have had an influence on some of the hip-hop writers, you would definitely be one of the names mentioned. Probably Gil Scott-Heron would be another, the last poets.
Sure.
Even your own son, your own family, you see following in a certain tradition.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I find that there are times when Amiri Baraka is critical of some of the young people, Spike Lee case. And you get the sense of a black aesthetic and a new black aesthetic. Do you see this sort of division occurring within our community in terms of black
Well,
art?
it's opportunism. You know, Spike Lee, you know, bless his soul, is an opportunist. I mean, I can't help that. I mean, to do what he did to Malcolm X's life is a betrayal of black people. I mean, you know, whatever you want to say, he could be young, he could be old, he could be any age. It don't make no difference to me. I mean, Clarence Thomas is old, and he's another opportunist. I'm saying this, that there are young people who can commit themselves to the tradition of liberation struggle. Now, you know, when people look at me and say, well, your work is political, it's not more political than Du Bois or Langston. You know, I'm not more political than Sterling Brown, certainly not more political than Du Bois, you understand, or Fred Douglass. Our tradition is one that has always had to face, you know, the kind of odds of being slaves, of being chattel, of being discriminated against and oppressed. I mean, here we are in 1998, and they're tying black people to the back of trucks, dragging them through the street. Now, if you tell me now that this is irrelevant to talk about it, then you're talking about somebody else's life. Because my life is affected by that. I could be walking, somebody's going to tie me to the back of a truck and drag me, you know, and send my bones all 5, 10, 20 directions. The point is, people shut up and muffle or find a disguise or they lie about the world to get over in the world. That's all. It's as simple as that. People become prostitutes. They become whores. Now, if you tell me that, Spike Lee had to talk bad about Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and the Black Panthers, and then quote people in his book who actually called Malcolm X the Benedict Arnold, I mean, that's impossible.
Let me ask you one final question.
Yeah, sure.
When you look at American poetry, what is your hope for? Where do you think it's going?
My hope is that the great poets that have existed in America will find their voice in a collective way, that we will be able to rescue all the lost and the obscure, the willfully hidden poets and poetry. You understand? I mean, look, I mean, even somebody like Melville, you know what I mean? He's discovered every once in a while. You know, it's that the people, the powers that be, hide that literature which speaks against their rule. And they've done that since the beginning of time, and they will do that as long as they can. They will do that until finally we are in charge. The people are in charge of publishing what needs to be published. Look, Lenin, even in 21, you know, we're talking about 3 years after the revolution, he's still complaining about not being able to get his books published in Russia. So, I mean, you know, the enemy dies hard. You know what I mean? And they will keep trying to publish the poems that were LeRoi Jones and before Amiri Baraka. They will keep trying to publish the poems of myself as a confused young man rather than, say, as a communist, for obvious reasons.
Well, I hope they will continue to publish them. As I said, as you said in your poem, The End of Tradition, our fingerprints are everywhere. When I think of your work, I am blessed for those fingerprints being there. And I think that many of us who are writers and who just appreciate literature, thank you, Amiri Baraka, for your contributions. I think it's impossible to talk about American culture without making reference to your work.
Well, thank you.
So I want you to thank you for being my guest here on The Writing Life.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on The Writing Life. My name is Ethelbert Miller.